Welcome to Candlelight Yin. I hope you are, maybe you have a few props. If you don't have props, you can just do this without the props. But here's what I'm going to do to start us off. I'm going to lie down with this pillow under my back. So my back goes the length of the pillow. If you don't have something like this, which is a yoga bolster, you can take two throw pillows, put them together, one on top of the other, or, one next to the other. Take any blanket you've got, throw it over the top, and you have a yoga bolster, and it works great. They're a little squishier, but this yoga bolster is pretty squishy anyway, so you can make up your own props. One of the things with yin that's important to me is that we're not too pushy. You can do yin without props. A lot of people do. So if you want to do this completely free of any extra objects, you're welcome to do that. The reason I like to use them is because I want the practice to be just at the beginning of sensation. This is referred to as the edge. The edge is not, oh my God, I almost can't stand it. That's past the edge. The edge is, I don't feel anything, I don't feel anything. Oh, now I feel something. That's it right there. That's the spot. Now, as you hold a pose, that spot may move. You might feel less or you might feel more sensation. If you feel more sensation, you can back off. That's what the props are for. If you feel less sensation, you can try going a little deeper in towards it to see what happens. One thing to be mindful of is that being really pushy is a yang activity. If we look at the Tao, yin is more receiving, more relaxed, an attempt to let go. And so if we're going to embody the practice fully, we want to embody that quality as well. Okay, so now that I've lectured, we're going to take a lying down position. I am going to start this bolster about where the bottom of my rib cage is. You can put the bolster all the way down to where your sacrum is, as long as it feels like it is in harmony with your body mechanics. Sometimes for me, my low back is a deeper curve and I can't quite find the right amount of support there. So the bolster higher is helpful. My low back can do it at once. Now, if you can do this butterfly pose, do this. Put your knees out like little butterfly wings and your feet together. And if this is too spicy, then this is where your props come in handy. I love to take a blanket, roll it up, and then put that underneath so I can tuck it up around my thighs. You could also throw a pillow or a block under each knee. Take a moment always with the pose and settle in. Do you want a little more head support or less? Is there something in your way? Should you extend the arms out a little more or less? So take the first few moments of a pose and adjust yourself. Then once you've got everything settled in, take a big breath. Let go with an ah, and let the body really relax over the props or onto the floor, as the case may be. Try to let all the muscles around your face and scalp and eyes get softer. For me, having this bolster here makes it such that I can let the shoulders relax a bit more. And so it feels like I get this kind of stretch across my chest and shoulders, which is lovely. If you're laying flat on the floor, it might be nice to extend the arms out or even up, sort of like a cactus, to create a similar kind of tractioning out right there around the chest muscles. Nice deep breaths. So we'll stay for about another minute here. So we're going to take a nice big breath. And then as you exhale, you can bring the knees together first and just pause there for a moment. I'm going to take this blanket out from underneath. And then windshield wiper a little bit back and forth. And then I'm going to take this bolster out from underneath my back. Okay, so then once I'm back here, I'm going to stretch out into a nice long shape. Oh, and we're going to do a banana. So to do the banana shape, you just curve your upper body over. So if I were essentially, if I were kind of a like a croissant or a banana shape, one side would be longer, one side would be curled in. So that's essentially what we're going to do. So stretching out and then curling the upper body in one direction and then swinging the legs in that same direction. You can even cross one leg over the other. You can grab one wrist with the hand if you like. And so one side feels longer, one side feels curled in. And we'll pause there for a bit. And letting yourself kind of sink a little bit. So sometimes when I first start, it feels like one hip is a little higher. Just letting that hip fall toward the ground. And you're not laying on your side. You are still laying on your back, just in case that went wrong. Nice deep breaths. It feels interesting to me to feel the breath kind of going down that side that's stretched out a little bit more. There's a little more sensitivity to that tissue because it's being pulled on. Whereas if I really pay attention to just the lung on the other side is actually expanding more. So we've got last minute here. And 2 more breaths. So then with your exhale, come on back to the center so that you are more evenly stretched out, and pause for just a moment and feel. So does the side that was just longer feel different than the side that was just curled in? Sometimes I would swear to you that my arm has grown a couple inches, my leg is a couple of inches longer. Usually it feels as if this hip is closer to the ground than the hip on the shorter side, which I find really fascinating. It really isn't different. Like if I put my hand here, my hip points are exactly the same height, but it feels very different, which is the part of yin that I love the most. Well, the part of yoga in general that I love the most, but definitely of yin. It's just noticing how the tissue sort of feels like it's been gently released in that tractioning, holding of pose. So we're going to do the opposite side. So first I like to do this, little windshield wipers with the legs, or you could even bring the knees in, and your sacrum is right here on the back of your pelvis, and it feels nice to do just a little rock right on that sacrum, a little circle. Oh. Just that part of the pelvis can be really sensitive, especially the joints around it. And so sometimes with a pose like this banana pose or a twist, it's nice to take a moment to release that area first before we do the other side. Okay, so I've just scooched over a little bit so I have a little bit more room for my legs. And then I'm going to take my upper body over first. I always do the upper part of the body first when it comes to the banana, because that will tell me how my back and this tissue right here on my hip feel, and whether I should go any further than that. So then I can, if I want to, cross this leg over and kind of swing the legs in that direction. I can grab the wrist if that feels interesting. And then I'm letting, because this side feels like it wants to roll up, I'm letting it roll and fall into the ground as deeply and softly as possible. Again, the approach to yin is to be soft like water, because as you can see in nature, even though water seems very soft and seems very fluid, it's quite powerful. It can be a rushing flood water, or it can carve a deep canyon in the earth like the Grand Canyon. And so the power of water is the power behind softness, and that's really what we're trying to embody in the yin practice. It's not too pushy, not too aggressive, really soft approach. And then staying long enough for the power to be wrought or reveal itself. So staying for about another minute here. So take a nice big breath. And then let yourself travel back to the center. And then just pause for a moment and see, does it feel like things are sort of neutralized or normalized on both sides? And by that I just mean, does it feel like they're about the same in terms of the softness or the traction or the sensation? And again, you can do some little windshield wiper moves or bring the knees in. I sometimes like to do both because it feels really nice just to release the sacrum. Now, speaking of the low back and sacrum, we are going to, from here, go into a Sphinx pose. I'm going to turn myself 180 degrees, but you could probably just flip over onto your belly. It's just all my things that I want are down at the other end of my mat, so I'm going to do that. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is have a blanket handy in case I want it. And then I've got a couple blocks and a couple pillows nearby. So in the event that I want to use any of those props coming up, I have them handy. Now, the Sphinx has several cousins. So this is the Sphinx, where I prop up pretty much on the elbow. Now, for me, if I tuck my elbows in under here, it feels like my shoulders kind of want to collapse a little bit around my head. If I bring the elbows slightly forward of my shoulder and then slightly closer together, that feels like my shoulder rests on my back, and it's a more comfortable Sphinx position. You can prop up onto the hands. I don't feel any need to do that. My low back does not need any more support than it already had. Or you can come down lower. So if you rest your chin or your forehead on your arms, that is a little lower position. I have seen that in many places called the crocodile, which is what I call it. So choosing whether it's a Sphinx, a crocodile, or a seal pose. You can, when you're working with yin, you can choose one, maybe do one for a couple minutes and another for a couple minutes. I like to use them kind of interchangeably instead, because my practice of teaching this yin practice, or my experience of teaching yin practice anyway, is that not everybody is comfortable in the same amount of flexion, or rather extension in the spine. So this area is more sensitive for some than others, is basically what I'm trying to say in English. And so by using them interchangeably, you can find the right one for you. And sometimes after I've been in one for a while, it feels better to do the next one a little bit more. Or it feels nicer to come out of it a little bit. One of the places where I feel often a little bit of resistance is right here at the hip flexor. So sometimes just gently extending that area and trying to create a sense of relaxation. And sometimes I'll find myself trying to grip with my glutes. That might be a habit that I have of kind of always holding tension in my body. It might also be that I'm trying to protect my back, right? So my glutes are tightening up because I'm being too pushy. So if I can get my glutes to relax and stay relaxed, then I might be okay. This is the way that I judge it. So we're going to stay for about another minute. And there's nothing wrong with a little tiny bit of movement while you're doing yin. You don't have to hold things completely still. It's really just a matter of if you find yourself fidgeting, that's an indication that you're probably in too deep or you're being too aggressive with the stretch, and your body's trying to protect you. Whereas if you are just kind of mindfully leaning from one hip into the other, that's fine. That's an exploration of the shape. You may find that you want to stay on one side for a few bits and then sway to the other side. That's all well and good. So we're going to take a big breath. Let go with a big ah. And then come on out of there. You can windshield wiper your legs back and forth. And then we're going to do a half of a frog. So rather than a full frog pose, we're going to do one leg at a time. So I'm going to take one leg. I'm going to do this one that's closer to the camera first. And just bring it up and open it up into a frog shape. So I've got my foot kind of kicked out. The knee can come higher or lower. The foot can come out further or stay in tighter. And then I'm trying to let this hip fall toward the floor. This is where blankets can come in handy. If you need a little padding under this area, right where that hip is, if you need padding under your knee or under your foot, grab that. The other thing that I find nice is to have something to lay on up here. So I could hold it like a sphinx, or I could put a little throw pillow up here and let myself rest on that, which I find more pleasant, or a yoga bolster, whatever you got handy. And I turn my head towards the knee that I'm doing. You could turn your head the other way. These are the choices that you make for your pose. And again, we're going to try to let this hip just get heavy into that place. All of us are a little different. I can get almost to the ground when my knee is where it is now. If I were to bring it up higher, then it lifts me up a little bit more. And so depending on how you've adjusted your bones, your joints, you might be being pushed further over to one side, there's nothing wrong with that. So we're feeling the sensation in the hip joint, around the glute, in the leg. Now, for me, this is not a really big, spicy pose. It's actually quite mild. But one of the things that surprised me in trying to practice it, because I like to take all the ideas out there about a practice and try them all before I judge it. So when I first looked at this pose, I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. But it not really doing that much. But then when I was done with the pose, I was amazed at how free and soft and lovely it made my hip feel. So I've become a fan of a shape that initially I didn't think was really impacting me. When I was done with it, I felt a lot more of that. It's very subtle, but a lot more of a kind of sense of freedom than I was expecting. The full frog pose is quite spicy, and I like it sometimes too. I like to do it whenever I feel like it, but this one I can hold longer and get a little softer in, and I enjoy that opportunity to really just relax deeply. Now this leg that's in the back, we're about halfway through. You can take that leg and bend it. You could even hold on to the foot if you felt like it. And that is going to change the shape. It becomes a little different, but it's lovely. I like to just lift it and occasionally wobble that bone, the femur bone, a little bit. It helps me relax more deeply through the pelvis. And then after I've done that, I can stretch out. And in letting go, I feel that hip get closer to the ground and the quads release a little bit more. Now for you, this might be quite spicy. And if that's the case, then what you may want to do is take the next 3 breaths and just notice. And if you're thinking, yeah, I just feel like I'm done, go ahead and stretch that leg all the way back and just rest in a crocodile for the last minute. If you're feeling like, no, this is really getting good, then stay for this extra minute. It's our last minute together in this shape. Take a really big breath. Let go with a really big sigh. Now, remember this leg, because this is the one we're going to work with in a second. But first, we're going to roll away from that hip and let that leg go all the way straight. And then just come back onto your belly and feel. Feel this leg, compare it to the other leg, especially at the front of the hip. And see if for you, you also are feeling how, if that was not a particularly spicy or intense pose, does it feel really interesting now? Can you feel that kind of sense of release and sense of soft freedom? That's how I would describe it. In that same hip, right? So you're noticing. There's no right answer. Whatever it is what it is. Now, we're going to do a shoulder opener on the tail end of this. So the way, before we do the other side, the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to extend one arm, and this is the leg that's going over the top. So I'm doing the opposite arm. I'm going to extend that arm all the way out. Now, sometimes I like to do this with my palm up, most of the time. Every now and then it feels better palm down, and sometimes it feels nice to bend the elbow. So you're going to stick the arm out to the side, pick up that leg that was frogging, and bring it around behind you. Now that that leg is there, adjust your shoulder. You might want the arm lower or higher. I like to put a pillow under my head or a yoga block if I've got that handy. And then this leg I can leave like that, or I can extend it out all the way long, and I can even take this leg out straight in front of me if it feels like that would be better. So whatever you wind up doing with this leg is fine, just as long as it's stable. This arm can go behind your back, or you can let it rest. I like to put it up front just because it keeps me a little more stable. And I'm just going to move my shoulder a notch down because I'm starting to feel some resistance in the joint itself that felt uncomfortable. So if your fingers go numb, your arm's not in the right place and we're pinching a nerve. So roll away, adjust your arm bones, and then come back and see if that's better. And if it feels like nothing is better, then you can also leave this pose a little early. So we're not going to hold this one as long because the tissue around the shoulder is not as deep. We have 6 layers of connective tissue. If we go way deep, we might even get to a 7th layer around the hips. Whereas with the shoulders, we're really looking more at 2 or 3 layers of tissue. So we're not talking about as deep a, like we don't have to stay as long to make an impact there as we might want to do to make an impact in this really deep, like the deep gluteal area or the front of the hip. And so we're halfway through here. So if you're feeling like it's too spicy, you could definitely roll out. We've got about 45 more seconds here. Just noticing how things are going. The shoulder for me is usually the spicier one, and it feels really nice. There's this point right about the 2.5 to 3 minute mark where everything just lets go. So take a nice big inhale, and then we're going to roll out of here. So we're going to take the leg back, release that shoulder. I like to take a few moments just to do some circles. Give the arm a little shake. Now, again, double check. Do you feel pins and needles or any trickiness, especially in these 3 fingers? That indicates that we were pinching a nerve that lives between the collarbone and the humerus and the shoulder blade. In that little triangular area, there's a nerve that goes through there. And if you've got numbness or tingling, you're probably pinching there. So we don't want to do that. So next time we'll try a little different position if that's the case. It's good to learn. So we're going to do the opposite side of our frog. So kind of checking in, feel yourself kind of roll over a little bit to the side. Bring your other frog leg up. And then feel for the right positioning. Should my leg be higher? Should it be lower? Do I want to kick my foot out a little bit more? And then you can let yourself get really soft with the pillow. Or you can stay propped up like a sphinx. Okay. Sometimes it feels really nice for me while it kind of, I'm holding this shape in my hip to just let my shoulder blade move around a little bit. There's this kind of really light sensation that I feel in my arm when I do that stretch that I find pleasant. This may not be the case for you, but I hope it is. Try to breathe with the whole body. So we're about halfway done. So this is always, for me, the halfway mark is a good time to check in and see, should I make a little different move? Is it just right? Is there anything I could do to bring more softness or more relaxation to my inner body? Do I feel like I'm getting, like being pushed? Is there tension in my mouth or around my eyes that kind of indicates I'm being a little too aggressive? Or in some cases, that tension that lives in the face is not about being pushy, but it's about a habit of holding on to tension, which might be because you're going through a really difficult time in your life. And we might be holding on to extra stress than we might normally hold on to. And so we're going to take 2 more breaths, and then this is that point where you could decide, I think I'm done. I'm going to undo this and lay in a crocodile, or we're going to hold this last minute together. Take a really big breath. And then kind of rolling towards that long leg hip. We're going to bring that other leg out of that frog. Take a moment just to feel. Do a little movement and relax the sensation in the hips. Oh, golly, that's nice. Okay, so then we're going to do this other arm. So you're going to stretch your arm out again, kind of adjusting for the placement there. You're going to swing your leg over the back, adjust the shoulder so it feels like it's the front of the shoulder, the chest, that's getting the bulk of this stretch. Oh. And then this leg can rest like this. You can extend it out. You can extend this leg out. It just depends on how it feels and how your knee responds and how pushy it feels like you're being in your shoulder. Okay. Now my clock is on the other side of me, so from time to time I might change around just to double check the time. Oh. But you can hold steady, yogis. Relax deeply through your jaw. We got 1 minute left here, yogis. Oh. Come back home to that deep breath if you left it behind. Take a nice deep breath. And then we'll take the leg back over. Oh, unwind the shoulder. Oh, and give yourself a little bit of movement there. Oh, that feels nice. Ooh. Okay, and then let yourself just kind of relax. You can go back to child's pose for a moment. You can do some cat shapes. Oh. Or even a little downward dog is nice right about now. Oh. Just give yourself a little bit of movement that feels nice. It was a long time to spend with our low back. Oh. Now we're going to come to a seated position. And we're going to do a pose called the deer pose. So to do it, one leg goes out to the side like this. One leg goes up front. So I have a 90-degree angle, about a 90-degree angle. They're about 90 degrees apart. Now, this kind of pushes me a little bit that direction. So generally what I do is I kind of build a little structure here for me to rest on. Like that. So I can put myself into that deer shape and then have a little armrest. What you can also do is fold forward and put yourself into that position, which kind of takes your deer a little bit towards a swan, because the leg is in a slightly different position. It's not necessarily a swan, although you can call it what you want. A rose by any other name. But this kind of gives me this, again, this kind of internal rotation of the hip, which we were doing in the frog. We're just kind of taking it one more step in this direction here. Relax through the mouth. And again, like, there's nothing wrong with a little kind of change up. Sometimes it feels good to me to turn a little bit that way or to turn a little bit this way. And so you can kind of gently adjust to the shape. Find an angle on it that's feeling really good tonight. We're staying with this for one more minute. It's a little shorter pose, but because we're revisiting a similar territory, not as long this round. Hopefully the aggregate of having held this is interesting. I love the feeling of being able to breathe really deeply and smoothly. My favorite part is that kumbhaka, that little held space. The very tippy top of the inhale right before it drops out. And then at the very bottom of that exhale, right before it drops back in. Okay, so we're going to lean in the direction of the top leg, or front leg. We're going to take this back leg out, and before we go too far, we're going to give it a moment, give it a little movement, and then you're going to bring that guy on top of this guy in some fashion. So it could be that you can put your knees on top of each other. This is called shoelace. Or it could be that you're going to put your shins on top of each other with the legs making a square. It's called square pose. Or you can do a modified square, which is what I like to do. Put a pillow or a block out in front of you, allow the leg to go at a different angle. And then the last possibility is to lay on your back with your legs in this position and either hold onto the legs themselves, or you could wrap like a strap or a towel or a dog leash, or if you got handy, around your legs and hold onto that. So you can do this laying down or sitting up. Some people can lean forward and put their elbows on the floor. I definitely don't need to do that. I already feel the spiciness in my outer hip and on my thigh. And so just pausing and breathing. Now this can be one of the spicier shapes. And so if you're feeling like, it's a little too spicy, you're starting to feel that tension build up. The way that it feels to me is, in my imagination anyway, if I'm in a pose too deep, it almost feels like my body is trying to pick itself up out of the pose like I'm laying on a bed of nails and I'm trying not to touch the actual surface of the nails. And I don't know if that's how they really lay on beds of nails, but in any case, like that feeling of kind of inner body tension that winds up expressing itself through thinning of my lips or kind of hardening at the back of the eye, that's definitely an indication that I am, it's a little too much. And so I should back off. I could put some props in to make it softer. I could flip it upside down. So those are ways to kind of modify the intensity. So we're about halfway through. So the question you have to ask yourself is, do I feel like that tension is building, or am I able to softly continue my stay here? And am I feeling myself gently releasing into the pose? So is there release or is there resistance? That's the question. And so, every pose has a different palette between those two extremes. Okay, so this is the point where for some of us 3 minutes is enough. We've stayed long enough to be fine. And the result of staying for another minute is not going to outweigh the intensity or the trickiness of it. If that's the case, come out, spend a minute moving gently. If you are thinking, no, it's just getting good. And that's the signal for me that I always know. It's like, no, yeah, oh yeah, it's finally on that spot where it's like, oh yeah. That's that's the door opening for me. I can stay longer and it feels really nice. And so that's the point where I'm kind of checking in. And it happens kind of magically at about 3 minutes. And then again at about 7 minutes if you ever stay for really long holds. I don't tend to do those with classes because some of us are really new to the yin practice. But there are definitely poses I like to hold for up to 10 minutes. And those, again, I look for those little doors. Do the little doors open that let me in? That feel like I'm continually getting that sense of relaxation? Or am I feeling the fight? So we're going to take a really big breath. Let yourself lean all the way back. So you're going away from your legs and then let your legs unwind. And this is where I know, right? So if my whole body feels like, when I've let it go, or does my whole body feel like, when I let it go? That was the perfect amount. I was too pushy. And this is something I've learned over time, is how to not be too pushy with my yin practice. Because this concept that people talk about the edge, I initially interpreted as being as far as I could go. And that is actually damaging. And, I created some problems for myself from being like that, for making that assumption. Okay, so now I've put my other leg in the other direction. And I do this thing where I kind of adjust my hip and say, where's the right spot? For me, this side is a different hip than that side. One of my hips is stronger than the other. I've got a lot more muscle in the glute on one side than I do on the other side. One side always feels a little softer than the other. And so by coming back to the beginning and saying, should I angle a little differently? Like for the other one, it felt better to angle myself in. On this hip, it's feeling better to angle myself out. And so just choosing those little options. And then letting yourself sink in. And again, I like to build this little thing, but you might be laying on your elbows because that feels really nice to go forward in the pose. things are shifting for me right here. This is our halfway point. So I'm just noticing like, it feels better for me to kind of lean myself a little back into the sit bone and come around a little more toward the front. And again, this is the dance. It's like, stay present. Sometimes with the longer holds, your mind will start to do the things your mind does. My mind does 3 things. It does what I call the planning and list making function, where it will have imagined conversations, make list of things, that I need theoretically, and stuff that it wants to plan for later. And it loves to do that. It's one of my brain's favorite functions. And then the second thing that it does is that it, sometimes I'll have like memories that are triggered either by a sensation or a smell or something like that. And so my mind will then trip off down that little memory lane exploring. And then the last thing that happens is there's little fantasy scenarios that go on inside my brain, little storytelling function. I think everybody has the same 3, but you might have different proportions of each. So we're going to stay for about 30 more seconds, you guys. Again, just staying present as best you can. Keep coming back to the pose, the sensation of your body, how it's relating to this particular arrangement of your bone structure. We're going to take a nice big breath. Lean away, bring that leg around. You can pause for a moment and rinse out that hip joint before you bring yourself into your version of either the shoelace or the square. You might know these poses by different names, double pigeon or cow face. In the yin world, they renamed all the poses so you wouldn't be confused. That sounds fun. I like to make that joke, but the real truth is that sometimes we have baggage about poses. Like, we've been taught the right way to do a pose. And one of the things that we're trying to let go of with yin is this right way idea. Really, like, put your bones in the shape, and then the right way is how it feels now, not the rules that you've been given for these poses. And so maybe now it feels really lovely to go over this way, or to go this way, or to side bend out this way, instead of the, like, oh, this pose is always done this way notions that we might have from other practices we've been taught or engaged in. Sometimes for me it feels really nice to stick my fingers in between my little toes and stretch out that part of my foot. And then finding that softness in the inner body, the jaw and the eyes. Lips super fluffy. Eyes super relaxed, deep and relaxed. If you find little places in the body where you might be holding on to some tension from life or the day, letting yourself have a moment to release some of those places. We're going through a really difficult experience. Really wild. I'm sure it's not totally unprecedented, although I keep hearing that word used. I'm sure that some of our ancestors experienced similar things. 2 of my great-grandparents died in the 1918 flu epidemic, leaving 11 children, including my grandfather, who was 18 months old, orphaned. And so I'm sure that if I were able to talk with them, they would tell me, yep, that's pretty much what we experienced. But for for our generation, it's pretty novel and unusual to be put in a position where we are facing the kind of fear and uncertainty that we're facing. And so this is that point where along the way, you guys, maybe we're going to stay for one more minute, maybe we're coming out. But anyway, my point is that we might be experiencing a lot of this uncertainty in our bodies. And so what yoga practice is really great for is to just be present with it. Not trying to necessarily change it per se, but to become aware of how we're doing it so that we can potentially, for at least a temporary period of time, soften and release some of that stress that we might be holding in our body. It's like giving ourselves a little break or a little vacation from the intensity. I'm not sure that there's a way around it. I think that we have to, as a society, go through this. But we have each other and we have our practice and we have the moment as it unfurls, one moment at a time. All right, take a big breath. And let go with a big, and then we're going to release all this shape. Inhaling up nice and slow, leaning back, unwinding the legs, and then taking a moment to just rinse out the low back, the ribs. Now you can do, again, like some cat shapes, kind of right here. Oh. We're going to do one more shape in this seated position, and that's going to be a dragonfly or a wide angle forward bend. So, moving my microphone so I don't kick it. I'm going to take the legs out wide. Now, my actual anatomy will allow me to go to about there, right? Generally speaking, I don't like the sensation of having my bone on my bone right in that place. So I back off just a notch. So I'm still feeling the intensity here, but I'm not getting the intensity there. The other thing that is true for me is that I hyperextend at the knee. And so because of that, I like to protect my knee joint. To do that, I just roll up a blanket. And by putting a blanket under my knee on either side like that, it gives me just enough softness at the back of the knee that I don't abuse my knee. In this area here, where the adductor attachment comes in and the calf muscle attachments come up, there's some very, very sensitive acupuncture and marma points. Marma points are the Indian equivalent of Chinese medicine. So there are very sensitive points on the back of the knee. There's even one that theoretically, if pressured at the right amount, will make you evacuate your bowels immediately. I don't know if it really works, but I don't want to find out in the middle of a yoga class. So be kind to the back of your knee, and be aware that that's a very sensitive area of the body, right on? I'm not an acupuncturist, so I don't know for sure that that is true, but I do know it's very sensitive. So be kind. And so if your body lets you fold forward, cool. If you're finding resistance and your pelvis goes backwards, that is natural. Actually, about 40% of the population is estimated to have that genetic condition. So there's a couple of options. You can sit up higher, and then sit right to the edge of whatever you're sitting on. So rather than having it towards the back, put it right under the edge of your sit bones. Just by elevating the sit bones, sometimes that'll bring the pelvis forward. The other option is to bend the knees more. So put a pillow under each knee instead of just a blanket, and that will let you get a little bit more of a forward momentum in this pose, should you want to. You can also just stay upright, you guys. It's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes I like to do my favorite mudra, which when I was a child I called reading or watching TV. I just kind of prop up my chin. Sometimes it feels nice to go like build up a little bit more pillows and lay all the way forward. That may or may not be available to you depending on your anatomy and how your body works. So I'm going to stay with this guy for a couple more minutes. This is one of the poses that for me I can hang out longer in. For you, this might be one of the poses that is a lot spicier and invites you to stay a shorter period of time. And my forward folding for me is one of my favorite places to experience the breath because I experience it in my back instead of in my chest and belly as much. So I feel how the muscles in my back are related to the bones. That's how I first kind of found the pathway of my latissimus dorsi muscle and the little muscles that go up and down the spine called spine extensors. So when you take a deep breath in that moment where the breath is being held, you can sort of feel the pattern of the tissue in your body. I say that and some people tell me that that's ridiculous, but hopefully you can feel it. We're on our last 20 seconds here, just hanging out for a wee bit longer. Take a big breath. Let go with a sigh. And then you can inhale your way up. Now, if you're loving that pose and you just want to stay longer, you can do that pose for longer instead of what I'm about to suggest, which is an inversion. Or if you want to do a little inversion, you can do that instead. Now, there are 3 inversions that I invite you to for yin. The first inversion is called supported bridge pose. And you'll need something to put under your hips. So whether that's a block or a throw pillow is up to you. You could do it with either one. The block is clearly a firmer surface. That goes underneath your pelvis. You're laying on your back, hips up, legs out. So I'm going to show you that in just a second. Second possibility is what's called the snail pose. And this is where you lay on your back, bring your legs all the way over your head and curl the knees in around your ears. So you sort of from the side resemble a snail. Now I am not going to show you that pose because I can't breathe when I do that pose because everything lays on my face. So instead, I'll show you the supported bridge pose. And then my favorite pose is either a legs up the wall, or if you don't have a wall, because sometimes in houses, having a handy wall is pretty rare. Instead, you can do what I call legs up the couch or instant Maui pose. So this is a beanbag chair that I have next to me. My couch is over there, but if if this were the couch, I would do the same thing. You just put your butt right up against the edge of your couch and put your legs up on top. And depending on the length of your bones, you might need a blanket under your hips. So let me show you supported bridge pose. So to start out, you can sit on the block, but it doesn't always land in the right spot. So I do it this way. Lift your hips, slide the block under, and then make sure it's underneath the pelvis and not under the low back, okay? Then you can stretch your legs all the way out or leave your feet rested on the floor. This is much more traction. I feel a lot more sensation, especially deep in the hip flexor area and in the psoas even, because I feel it all the way up, so I'm pretty sure that's what it is. It might be the abs. It's hard to know. The other possibility is if I let my feet rest, then my shoulders are a little heavier. It's not as intense right here. So this is a lovely pose. If you are okay with a tiny bit of yang in your yin, you can do this pose, which I like to refer to as martini pose, because I think at the end of a long, hard day, instead of a martini, this is pretty nice. can have the martini too if you're really into it. I find alcohol puts me to sleep and then wakes me up, so I don't do a lot of it at night anyway, for special occasions. And then the other possibility, of course, is, as I described, putting your legs up on I'm going to stay here because I'm here now, but putting your butt up against your couch, putting your legs up on the edge of the couch, and checking that out. Oh. And sometimes, like, the little edge of the block is a little pokey, so I can adjust. You might even put a blanket over the block. Pillows are a little nicer. And then let your head stay in a neutral position. You can adjust the shoulder blades. Whew. And we'll stay here for about another minute. It's nice to give the body a chance to move the lymph around, to change the relationship of the blood flow to the heart. If inversions aren't your thing, then what you can do instead is just a little extra shavasana here. Or maybe you stayed with that beautiful dragonfly pose as well and you're still hanging out there. That's fine too. One of the beauties of practicing yoga at home is that you can kind of go off book because you're not going to disturb anybody else's practice. It's just you in your living room or bedroom or, whatever, spare room, office, whatever you got going on at your house. All right, yogis. So it's time for some shavasana. We're just about. So I'm going to give myself one more little jiggle here with my martini. And then I'm going to bring my legs down. And I'm going to get this block out from under me. Now this is my favorite part of the supported bridge pose, which is like, feeling my sacrum hit the ground again, and then giving it, just a lovely little rock and roll right on the floor. Oh, it's just so nice. Now for you, this might not be the right shape, and you might feel like there's some tenderness there, and you'll know whether to ever do that again or not. So then take one leg and kind of reach it out and let it relax. And then do the same thing with the other side. Now, you can certainly put your pillows underneath your legs and a blanket underneath your head. Sometimes for me, the practice is like it's pulled me enough that I don't need the extra props. I usually love to have something under my legs. And then sometimes it's nicer just to have the blanket or the bolster there. If you're chilly, it's gotten a little chilly tonight, you can cover with a blanket. Now, sometimes pets and children don't allow a whole heck of a lot of relaxation. So if instead a meditation would be better than lying down, you can do that for sure. They're all good. Okay. So once you're snuggled in, take a nice deep breath and then let go with an ah. You might have to do that a couple times. Nice big inhale. Big deep ah. So again, we're stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system through the vocal cords. Again, I've said this before, not tonight I don't think, but one of the longest nerves in the body is the vagus nerve, and it wanders. That's why it's called vagus, like a vagabond. It wanders through the inner body. And my personal opinion is that all of the experiences that we have that we refer to as chakras, or that created the chakra model, are actually places on the vagus nerve. So I think chakras actually exist. It's just the vagus nerve, as opposed to this kind of esoteric model. But in any case, one of the places where the nerve touches is there in the throat. It goes through the larynx. And when we make sound, whether that's chanting or singing or a sigh, we actually tone the nerve, which is responsible for the lion's share of our parasympathetic or relaxation response. And so sometimes, you know, that like idea of vocalizing can be very helpful. And then feel yourself soften everywhere. Soften the crown of the head. And the area around the temples. Let the eyes get really heavy in the sockets. And let the cheekbones and the lips and the jaw all relax. Make any final adjustment to your arm placement, and then feel yourself allow the shoulder blades and the backs of the arms and the palms or the back of the hands to relax completely. Feel the diaphragm and the muscles in the deepest part of the belly gently soften. Allow the pelvis and the buttocks to grow heavier on the floor and the leg bones to grow lighter. Feel the soles of the feet and the toes gently release away from the center. Whole body relaxed. Whole body. Now, yogis, if you decided to do yin in bed, you could probably just stay where you are. But if for any reason you decided to do yin in your living room and you are into the idea of coming out of Shavasana for some reason, maybe you want to just stay here, just go, turn off your phone or your computer and come back and lay here. Or you could start to kind of wiggle your fingers and toes. And spread them out. And wiggle them again. And spread them out so you can get a little more space between little fingers. And then do some wrist and ankle circles. And then you can give yourself a little banana stretch like we did at the beginning. Bring your knees into your chest, give yourself a hug. Now, my favorite way to end Shavasana is to lay on my side for a bit. And often when I do yoga classes out there in the world, I will be in this position for as long as possible until I feel the eyes of all the other members of class boring into my soul. And then I know, I stayed too long. But for you, it might only need to be a few seconds. So when you're ready, you're going to let yourself sit up. And yogis, I hope you had a beautiful time practicing tonight. I'm so delighted to be able to practice with you in your homes while I practice in mine. It would be lovely if we could practice together in person, and I hope we will again soon. So have a great rest of your evening. Namaste, yogis.